Cut that feed before it infects the grid, Holt ordered, his tone carrying across the command deck like a snapped steel cable. The heads-up displays along the walls showed distorted images from a distant station, fragments of panicked faces and jagged symbols before the recording fractured into static. The air inside the control center felt dry, filtered again and again through scrubbers, carrying a faint trace of heated insulation. Holt's fingers pressed against the railing beside his chair, his knuckles whitening as he forced himself to remain composed. Every eye was fixed on him, searching for certainty he did not feel, but had to project. The silence that followed the order was more unsettling than the burst of static that preceded it. Each man on the deck could still hear the sound in his imagination, the desperate cries, the cutting distortion, the abrupt void. Merrick Olin, thin and sharp-eyed, leaned forward at his station. "That was the fourth colony in 2 weeks," he said, his voice low, words clipped as if he feared speaking too loudly might invite attention from beyond the hull. His screen scrolled with fragmented logs, corrupted characters, and in strings of nonsense that once carried history, records, and orders. Same pattern. The erasure comes first, then nothing. Quartermaster Jan Bray stepped closer to Holt's chair. His uniform still bore stains from his work with cargo crews. The scent of engine coolant clung to him. "Civilians in the yard are already asking questions." Word spreads faster than we can contain it. They've seen what's coming. His hands flexed against his datapad as though even holding the device was futile if the next pulse from the Veer choir swept through. Holt straightened, his gaze hardening on the main laser plasma display where the tactical grid flickered. "They want to erase the story before they erase the people," he said. "That's their doctrine. If the record dies, the will to fight dies with it. They think if no memory remains, we're finished before the battle starts." The deck vibrated faintly as outer rail batteries cycled a test charge. It wasn't comforting. It was a reminder of what little stood between them and the incoming fleet. The tang of ozone-less charge reached the crew, stinging the back of the throat. Holt inhaled slowly, steadying himself. "So we'll keep our stories in places they cannot reach. We'll make every man here a living archive." Rander, the Marine sergeant, stood near the bulkhead, with his arms crossed, his scarred jaw set like carved stone. He broke the silence with a grunt. "Men won't like carrying myths instead of orders, Captain. They're soldiers, not priests." His words carried the weight of a man who had fought boarding actions in ships where screams bounced off narrow corridors. Holt's reply was measured, deliberate. "They won't carry myths. They'll carry procedures written as stories, rehearsed until instinct takes over. If they cut the network, no man waits for permission. He already knows what the next page of the story demands." Olin nodded, his fingers already typing furiously. "I can seed them." Echo cylinders, tungsten cores etched with protocols, hidden in hull cavities, in ballast, anywhere radiation cannot overwrite. Some will be implants, subdermal, carried by officers. His voice quickened, as though the act of planning forced the fear back into its cage. The men around him listened with quiet intensity. The deck smelled of recycled air, the hum of circulation fans behind the walls reminding them of their own fragility. The only sound louder was the scrape of boots as Bray stepped back to the logistics table. "I'll get the engravers running. If the civilians see us hiding things in the bulkheads, they'll panic." "They're already panicking," Holt said. He turned toward the crew, his eyes sweeping across each face. "Better they panic with cylinders in place than with nothing at all." The tactical display blinked with a warning. A new contact registered on long-range sensors. The sigil was unmistakable. Choir ship, escorted by 2 heavy cruisers and a screen of frigates. The deck seemed to grow colder at the sight, as though the bulkheads themselves tightened. Rander's jaw clenched. "So it begins." Olin adjusted his screen, narrowing the readings. His voice faltered before steadying again. "The choir will target our yard cores first. Guidance systems, archives, medical logs, all will vanish. Civilians will be blind. Loaders frozen mid-cycle." He glanced at Holt. "If your plan works, continuity survives. If it fails," Holt cut him off, "then we become another silent station." His words echoed in the room like a judgment. For a moment, the only sounds were the low buzz of filtered air and the distant rumble of the batteries outside. He let the weight settle before continuing. But not today. Not here. He rose from his chair, boots striking the deck with deliberate force. Distribute the first set of echo drills to every squad. Seal the cores. When the erasure comes, it will find nothing but empty circuits. The story will live in us. The men moved quickly. Bray hurried to the lift, barking orders into his handheld. Olin bent over his station, sweat shining on his brow as he typed. Rander walked toward the exit, his stride heavy, already rehearsing how he would sell stories to Marines who trusted rifles more than fables. As the door closed behind them, Holt lingered on the display. The choir ship loomed larger with each passing second, a black silhouette against the field of stars. He could almost hear the silence it carried, the silence that had consumed 4 colonies before them. He touched the railing once more, his grip steady now. They believe memory is fragile, he murmured to himself. They'll learn that it can also be a weapon. The deck lights dimmed as alert sirens began, their long wail. The sound cut through the filtered air, rattling teeth and stirring stomachs. Crewmen strapped themselves into their stations, the bitter taste of fear thickening in their throats. Holt lowered himself back into the command chair, every muscle tense. Outside, the first pulse wave rippled toward them. Inside, the men of Fort Arcturus waited, not for salvation, but for the chance to prove that silence could be broken by those who refused to forget. "Shields won't stop it. Cut the cores now," Holt shouted, his voice cutting across the command deck. Officers snapped to action, hands flying across consoles, disconnecting main memory units, powering down automated loaders, and pulling plugs on every vulnerable circuit. A tremor rolled through the station as the first wave from the choir ship struck. Lights flickered, heads-up displays bled into streaks of static. The entire command deck shook, as though the structure itself had exhaled under pressure. Men gritted their teeth as the shock rippled through the flooring. A hot tang of burned plastic stung their nostrils, rising from fried circuits, and the thin taste of iron touched tongues as the air grew sharp with recycled heat. Holt forced his gaze to the laser plasma display, watching icons vanish in a cascade of collapsing signals. Civilian freighters appeared as hollow outlines, stripped of navigational memory. Dock cranes froze mid-swing, cargo containers suspended like toys over the yard. Bray cursed under his breath, gripping the logistics table until his nails whitened. "They wiped half the loaders clean," Bray reported, his voice harsh. "Convoy control is gone." "Then the men will move them by hand," Holt snapped. "Get volunteers on tethers. I want every container latched down before the next wave." The order settled in with weight. Crews sprinted from the deck, boots clattering against metal plates, rushing toward hangars that glowed red under emergency lights. Through the viewport, workers could be seen climbing onto frozen machinery, strapping cables to containers, their gloved hands raw from friction against the lines. The cold of space seeped through bulkheads, biting their skin even through suits. Yet they moved with urgency born of fear and duty. Olin hunched over his console, his thin frame rigid. Secondary pulse incoming, 30 seconds. His eyes darted across corrupted strings, scrolling faster than anyone could read. They're not targeting hardware this time. They're striking comm layers, anything that still carries signal. Rander strode onto the deck, his boots echoing with a heavy rhythm. His uniform bore streaks of grease, a rifle slung across his back. Marines are in position. Squads drilled on echo routines, just like you ordered. They'll act even if they can't hear me. His jaw tightened, showing both defiance and unease. Holt nodded once. "Then we'll hold the deck together through discipline, not electronics." He turned to Olin. "Launch the mirrors." At his command, hidden ports opened along the station's outer skin. Compact relays pushed outward, tiny mirrors gleaming faintly as they locked into formation. They caught the starlight, scattering beams of coded flashes between ships and bastions. Old, almost primitive methods, but immune to erasure pulses. The second wave hit. Holt braced against the console as alarms shrieked. Displays blacked out entirely before flickering back in fragments. Men clamped their hands over ears as feedback screeched from headsets. The acrid burn of melting insulation forced eyes to water. Holt blinked through the haze, jaw rigid. Then slowly, the coated light beams blinked across the viewport, steady, unwavering. Messages still passed, though crude and delayed. His throat eased slightly. They were still connected. Rander leaned close to Holt's chair, his scarred face taut. They'll spot the mirrors quick enough. Those frigates will tear them apart. They only need to last long enough, Holt replied. Every second we keep control is a second they can't erase our men's coordination. An explosion rattled the deck, throwing two officers against the bulkhead. Bray caught himself on the logistics table, his face pale, sweat cutting down his cheek. Frigate fire, he said hoarsely. Outer relay towers down. Cycle new codes, Holt ordered. Rotate beams. Don't give them a fixed pattern. His voice was raw now, not from shouting but from the strain of holding command in the middle of unraveling order. Olin suddenly stiffened at his station. Captain, incoming boarding pods flagged on long-range sensors. They're shifting tactics. They're moving to capture, not just wipe. Holt's pulse quickened, though his face remained hard. I expected that. They need survivors for their trials. He stood, gripping the railing tightly. Rander, get your squads into the corridors. Funnel them into our traps. Use the echo drills. They know the sequences. The Marine's eyes flashed with grim satisfaction. Aye, Captain. He turned on his heel, barking orders into his comm. Static answered, but his squads had already rehearsed what to do when silence came. From the viewport, the choir ship loomed like a cathedral of black stone against the stars. Its escorts tightened formation, sleek hulls glinting under the reflection of Fort Arcturus's defensive lights. Pods peeled from their sides like seeds scattered from a poisoned flower, glowing faintly as they streaked toward the bastions. Holt watched them descend, each one a capsule of erasure doctrine aimed at turning his fortress into another hushed ruin. Captain, Bray said suddenly, his voice trembling, though he forced steadiness into it. Civilians are flooding the lower decks. Families. They're terrified. We can't hold them all in containment. Holt turned sharply. Move them into service. Tunnels behind heat baffles. Mask their signatures. Keep them hidden from scanners. He hesitated for a fraction, then added, and give them cylinders to carry. If they survive, the story survives. The order seemed to weigh on Bray like stone, yet he nodded and left without argument. Olin straightened from his console, eyes burning with both fear and fierce purpose. If they cut every signal, I can still launch neutrino bursts through the old reflectors. They'll crawl out slow, but they'll reach the border stations. Someone will know what happened here. Do it, Holt said. If we fall, let the galaxy watch the choir stripped of its silence. The deck jolted again. Holt steadied himself, his mind already shifting to the next step. Boarding pods would soon strike. Civilians were scattering to hidden shelters. Mirrors blinked their crude light across the black, holding fragile coordination alive. His men gripped rifles, waiting in dim corridors painted red by emergency beacons. Each knew their next page in the story drilled into them. Holt let his gaze return to the main display. The choir ship was closer now, its hull illuminated by the cold glare of stars. It moved with deliberate arrogance, as if it already counted Fort Arcturus as a finished record. His lips tightened. He would not give them silence. He would give them a record they could never erase. Hold the line, he said, his voice carrying across the deck. Let them come. They'll find we've written our story in places they cannot touch. The crew tightened their grips on controls. Marines readied weapons in the dark, and civilians clutched cylinders against their chests like lifelines. Outside, the first boarding pods cut across the stars, engines glowing bright as they locked onto the station. Inside, men of Fort Arcturus prepared for impact, not as victims, but as bearers of memory that would outlast whatever came through the breach. Pods will strike in under 3 minutes, Olin announced, his voice dry, stripped of anything but urgency. The heads-up displays flickered across the command deck, each frame showing hostile signatures descending in staggered arcs. The room smelled faintly of overheated insulation, the air running dry across tongues as scrubbers strained against the surge of activity. Every man's breathing seemed louder than normal, punctuated by the rattling siren that refused to let the moment slip into denial. Holt stood at the center railing, his hand gripping the cold bar until the skin at his knuckles stretched pale. His mind was a storm of calculations and choices, but his words carried none of that chaos. They'll drive for our dock sectors first. If they cut those evacuation halts, we'll funnel them away and bleed them in corridors where we hold advantage. His tone left no room for debate. Rander burst in, helmet tucked under his arm, eyes burning from the recycled air. Sweat ran down his temple in thin lines, and he spoke with the bluntness of a soldier stripped of ceremony. My squads are waiting at choke points. They'll buy us ground, but if the pods land clean, we'll be outnumbered within the hour. Then they won't land clean, Holt replied evenly. He turned to Olin. Light map them. Olin's long fingers slid across his console. Pulse decoys active. Across the external hull, faint strobing signals blinked like a field of fireflies. The Veer sensors would see shapes that weren't there, distances that warped, signatures leading into dead ends. Olin didn't look up from his work. They'll commit to the wrong entry points. The rest is up to our men. The deck jolted violently, rattling the fixtures overhead. Sparks spat from a fried console, leaving the acrid taste of charred plastic in the air. Bray steadied himself against a bulkhead, eyes wide. They're cutting stabilizers on the West Bastion, he reported, his voice breaking before he forced it into steadiness. Hull plating holding, but another strike could breach. Holt's jaw set like stone. Seal compartments forward of the strike zone. Civilians move to secondary tunnels. Don't wait for confirmation. Rander's boots hammered against the floor as he strode toward the exit, snapping his helmet on. I'll hold them myself if it comes to it. Holt stopped him with a sharp look. You'll hold with discipline, Sergeant. One man fighting alone is a body count. Your squads carry the echo drills. Use them. Rander's eyes flickered with a spark of defiance before giving way to grim respect. Understood. He disappeared through the hatch, his men's voices already rising in anticipation over local comms. The noise of evacuation reached the command deck even through layers of steel. Holt could hear the muffled shouts of families moving, children crying, boots scraping across service tunnels. The echo of fear mingled with the low rumble of bulkhead doors sealing. Every sound reminded him of the stakes, not just military victory, but the survival of stories, of memory. He swallowed hard, then addressed Bray without turning his gaze from the laser plasma display. Distribute more cylinders. If those people survive, they'll carry record enough to rebuild. Bray hesitated, his voice wavering. Some will panic if we hand them these. They'll know what it means. Then panic with knowledge, Holt snapped, eyes never leaving the enemy icons closing in. Better that than ignorance when the lights die. Another shockwave shook the deck, throwing men against their stations. The screech of torn plating reverberated through the floor. Olin's monitor lit with crimson. Impact detected. First pod latched to West Corridor. His throat tightened as he added, dozens more inbound. Holt forced the air from his lungs in a measured breath. Seal bulkheads 2 levels deep. Open fire only when they commit past them. Second junction. Make them think they're winning before we break them. The room filled with the scent of sweat and scorched wiring, the taste of dry, recycled air clinging at the back of throats. Each man clutched controls as if they were lifelines. The external displays showed pod after pod cutting through the black, streaking toward the station like fiery nails driven into wood. Olin leaned closer to Holt, his voice pitched low, urgent. If they breach multiple sectors at once, we won't hold with manpower. You know their doctrine. They'll drag survivors out for trials, record the silence of our defeat. They want us alive only to humiliate what we stood for. They want silence, Holt murmured, his eyes fixed on the approaching icons. Then we'll make the noise unforgettable. Rander's voice crackled briefly over the deck intercom before dissolving in static. They caught fragments, shouted orders, the bark of rifles, the grinding scream of breech plating. The men on the deck fell silent, listening even when words faded. Holt's chest tightened, not from fear alone but from the knowledge that the first pages of the echo drills were being lived at that moment in blood and fire. Captain, Bray whispered, staring at his console, his face drained of color. We're holding back thousands of civilians with 3 corridors and an aging shield grid. If one section collapses, then we hold the others, Holt cut in, his tone harsh, not cruel. His eyes burned with conviction. Every corridor they take costs them time. Every page we follow costs them more. That is the price of continuity. The station rocked again, harsher this time. A deep groan rolled through the bulkheads as though the fortress itself protested. Holt steadied himself against the railing, the vibration buzzing through his bones. He tasted copper on his tongue where he had bitten it. Around him, men glanced upward as dust drifted from the ceiling panels, falling in soft showers onto glowing consoles. Olin's voice rose above the din. Secondary pods breaking formation, heading toward dock sectors. His hands flew over keys, his thin shoulders tight with strain. If they cut those, evacuation collapses. Holt turned sharply. Redirect auxiliary guns. Fire blind if you have to. Keep those docks open. The guns thundered outside, each blast reverberating through the deck with a bone-deep vibration. Through the viewport, streaks of fire arced, slamming into incoming pods. Some exploded into showers of fragments, scattering across the darkness. Others pressed forward undeterred, flames trailing as they cut into atmosphere locks. Rander's final transmission pierced through, clearer this time. We've got them boxed, choke points holding, but they're pushing hard. Men are falling. The words cut into Holt like a blade. He forced his jaw tight, refusing to let emotion weaken his command. Hold long enough for the story to turn, he whispered under his breath. Words only he heard. On the main display, enemy icons multiplied. The siege was tightening. Each pod that landed was a reminder that Fort Arcturus was not merely defending a station, it was defending memory itself. Holt stood tall, the railing cool beneath his grip, his voice steady as he gave the next orders. Seal every tunnel behind the civilians. Keep the corridors narrow. If they want us alive, let them fight through fire to take us. The deck crew responded in unison, men clinging to their duties like lifelines. Holt knew the station would soon shake again, harder than before. But he also knew that every second one here was another page written in the echo that would outlast them all. Hold your fire until you see their shapes break the smoke. Sergeant Rander's order cracked through the corridor like a whip. His men crouched behind overturned crates and makeshift barricades. Rifles leveled down the narrow passage where the first boarding pod had cut through. The station's metal bones groaned under strain, dust trickling from overhead seams, the air hot with the sting of scorched wiring. Boots scraped lightly against the deck. Restless men shifting their weight while they waited for the enemy breach to finish carving. The outer hatch gave a tortured shriek as thermal saws melted its frame. A dull vibration traveled through the floor, rattling teeth in their jaws. Then silence stretched, broken only by the hiss of smoke rolling through the gap. It carried the bite of burned alloy that clung to tongues and stung eyes. Rander's heart pounded like a hammer in his chest. Yet his grip on the rifle stayed firm, knuckles hard beneath the glove. The hatch collapsed inward. Alien silhouettes surged forward, broad, angular frames, armor etched with ritual marks that glowed faintly under emergency lights. Their steps landed heavy, deliberate, as though confident they already owned the ground they entered. The first one raised a curved weapon, its barrel spitting searing bolts that cut lines of molten orange into the bulkhead. Now, Rander bellowed. His squads answered in unison, rifles cracking in a rolling volley. The confined corridor amplified every shot, deafening thunder pressing against eardrums. Casings clattered to the floor, hot brass biting against boots. Sparks erupted as rounds slammed into invading armor, some bouncing off, others punching through weak joints. The smell of burned flesh mixed quickly with the metallic tang of blood misting the air. The first alien staggered, a hole torn through its chest, collapsing with a guttural roar that reverberated through helmets. Another rushed past only to trip the concealed wires stretched knee-high across the junction. A grenade wired to the line snapped free and detonated, filling the corridor with smoke, flame, and shrieking fragments. Men flinched as shrapnel peppered shields, some biting through exposed limbs. One Marine screamed, clutching a shredded forearm, but his comrade dragged him back into cover, jaw clenched in fury. Keep the lines tight, Rander barked, his voice carrying authority sharpened by survival instinct. They push. We push harder. Another wave pressed forward, alien voices echoing guttural commands, armor clanking against bulkheads. Their rifles spat harsh bursts, rounds gouging deep scars in station walls. A Marine 2 places down from Rander jerked violently as a shot tore into his chest plate, throwing him backward with a thud. His helmet rolled free, clanging as it spun across the floor before resting face down. Rander gritted his teeth. "Cover me," he shouted. Without hesitation, he vaulted from cover, boots pounding against the deck, rifle spraying bursts at close range. He ducked behind a ruptured support column, heat singeing his cheek as an enemy shot tore past. His stomach knotted with adrenaline, sweat running beneath his collar. But he rose again, firing point blank into the alien ranks until one toppled forward, crashing onto the deck with its weapon clattering aside. The Marines roared encouragement, pressing forward in unison. The corridor became a battlefield of smoke, flame, and screams. The stench of blood thickened, mingling with the bitter tang of molten alloy. Ears rang from the concussive blasts, each man half deaf, half blinded, but driven forward by drilled sequences engraved into memory. Suddenly, a shout cut through. "They're breaching the secondary junction!" A squad near the rear turned just as another pod slammed into the station's flank. The floor shuddered violently, knocking men from their knees. Panels overhead broke loose, raining sparks and fragments. "Fall back to the second choke point," Rander barked. His throat burned with each word, lungs raw from the smoke. "Do it by the story. We practiced this." The retreat wasn't chaotic. Men moved with grim order, covering one another as they stepped backward into the next prepared corridor. As they withdrew, charges planted earlier detonated, collapsing sections behind them, filling tunnels with fire that swallowed pursuing Veer. The explosions rattled ribs, the blasts pushing hot air across sweating faces, but the fallback succeeded. At the second choke, Marines regrouped. Breathing was harsh, ragged, but weapons reloaded with hands that shook only slightly. Rander checked his men quickly. Eyes met his, hollow yet resolute. They were bleeding, coughing, some trembling, but none looked away. Olin's voice crackled through the comm in short bursts of static. "Pulse map shows enemy mass splitting, one column down main corridor, another circling East Junction." His words were tight, urgent. "If they cut through East, they'll flank you." Rander spat to clear his mouth of grit. "Then we close East with blood if we have to." He turned to his men. "Split squads. I'll lead main corridor. Vass, take East. Remember the drills. When they force, you break them with the turn." The younger Marine nodded, his lips pale but his nod steady. He vanished with half the squad, boots pounding into smoke-filled passages. Rander returned his attention forward, listening. Alien boots thundered closer, heavy steps echoing like drums of war. He raised his rifle. "Steady! Make them pay for every step!" The enemy surged into view again, their guttural chants reverberating as rifles blazed. Fire met fire, deafening thunder filling the passage. Rander felt the recoil hammer against his shoulder, smelled the sting of scorched alloy with every burst. His eyes watered from smoke, but he squeezed the trigger again and again, cutting down one invader after another. A grenade tumbled into their barricade, rolling close with a sinister blink. Rander dove forward, kicking it away with the heel of his boot. The blast tore through the floor mid-air, throwing sparks and fragments that seared his cheek. Pain lanced across his skin, hot blood dripping, but he forced himself up, rifle still raised. The corridor was littered with bodies, both human and alien, smoke curling over the fallen. The clang of boots signaled more enemies approaching. Rander glanced at his dwindling squad, their faces streaked with grime and blood. Yet still they raised rifles, jaws clenched in silent defiance. He spoke through the ringing in his ears, voice raw but unshaken. "We don't hold ground. We hold the story. Every second we live, we write another line they cannot erase." His men tightened grips on their weapons, their eyes catching fire in the gloom. The next wave surged forward. Rander inhaled the bitter air, felt the sting of sweat in his eyes, tasted iron where his lip had split. With a roar, he led his Marines into the inferno once more, the corridor shaking with the weight of their defiance. "Target the source, not the claws," Holt commanded, his voice steady though the command deck swayed from repeated impacts. He leaned over the railing as the laser plasma displays flickered with chaotic overlays of battle. Marines bleeding in corridors, civilian transports half secured, boarding pods still hammering at bastions. None of it mattered if the choir ship kept its grip on them. He jabbed a finger toward the glowing icon at the heart of the hostile formation. The emitter vanes. Tear them open. The crew hesitated. It was one thing to trade blows with frigates clawing at their hull. It was another to strike the ship that anchored the Vire Doctrine. A murmur rippled across the deck as officers glanced at one another, their knuckles white around their controls. Holt's gaze cut across them with the sharpness of a blade. "If we let it sing, nothing else matters. Fire control, prepare a full spread. Olin, I want firing solutions based on pulse maps, not sensor feeds. Those feeds are lying to us." Olin's face glistened with sweat, the glow of his console reflecting off his glasses. His voice shook, though his fingers moved with desperate speed. "The choir's shields warp every reading, but the pulses, they cut across mass. I can trace interruptions when their own troops move in front of the vanes." He slammed the data forward. "I can give you a pattern, not perfect, but enough." "Enough is all we ever get," Holt said. He turned to gunnery crews, his jaw set. "Lock on to Olin's pattern. No half measures, all rails on my mark." The deck groaned under another assault, the shriek of tearing alloy vibrating through their boots. Brace staggered as an overhead panel shook loose, raining dust across the consoles. His voice cracked with urgency. "Captain, if we divert rails, our flanks open wide. Frigates will cut us apart before we reload." "Then we finish this before reload," Holt replied coldly. He felt the eyes on him, men searching for confidence in the storm. He forced his chest to rise evenly, though his heart hammered like a drum inside. Through the viewport, the choir ship loomed larger, its cathedral-like silhouette framed by the gleam of stars. Its surface pulsed with faint red glow as emitters charged for another wave. Holt clenched the railing harder, the chill biting into his palm. If that pulse fired, every record left alive on the station would crumble. He lowered his voice, speaking only to those close enough to hear. "If we don't cut it down now, we won't get another chance." The countdown scrolled across Olin's console, a glowing marker ticking toward alignment. Sweat ran into his collar as his lips moved in silent calculation. Finally, he shouted, "Now! Fire!" Holt barked. The deck quaked as the rails unleashed their fury. The roar of launched slugs rattled through the hull, a thunder that seemed to shake every bone in their bodies. Through the viewport, bright trails carved across the dark, converging on the choir ship. For a heartbeat, Holt thought they would vanish against its shield curtain like all others. Then the first impact struck. A blinding flare erupted where a vein protruded, shards of alloy spinning free in violent arcs. Another slug slammed home, rupturing the housing. The ship buckled, fire tearing across its frame as panels burst outward. A sound unlike anything they had heard filled the deck. A static lace shriek transmitted through open frequencies. The death cry of the choir's field collapsing. Holt's teeth clenched at the raw vibration that made his eardrums ache. On the displays, system after system flickered back to life. Loader cranes shuddered and resumed motion. Freighter cores rebooted, navigation lines restoring like veins filling with blood. "They're alive again," Bray breathed, his voice hushed in awe. "We've got systems back." Holt didn't allow relief. "Reboot secondary batteries. Get every civilian craft moving. We've opened a hole. Push them through it." As the choir ship reeled, chaos rippled through the Revere formation. Frigates pulled tight around their wounded centerpiece, their fire growing erratic. On intercepted bands, Olin caught fragments of guttural shouts, commanders scrambling without their doctrinal core. He turned in disbelief. "Captain, they're broadcasting open panic." Holt's lips tightened into something close to a grim smile. "That's what happens when you silence yourself with one doctrine. When it fails, you have nothing left." Suddenly, the main deck speakers hissed. Every channel, even those the crew had locked down, flooded with fragments. It wasn't alien this time. It was human. Stories, recordings, chants of names, fragments of lost transmissions that the choir had buried. They spilled across the comms, voices layered together, some pleading, some singing, some laughing as if alive again. The men on the deck froze, their skin prickling as those voices cascaded over them. Holt's throat tightened as he recognized one, a log from a station commander who had resisted weeks earlier, her voice cut short by the final pulse. The Veer had buried it. Now it poured free across the void. "Captain," Olin whispered, his voice raw, "we've unbound the archives they erased. Every signal they suppressed is spilling out. The galaxy is hearing them." Holt closed his eyes briefly, letting the weight of it press into him. Then he opened them, sharp again. "Amplify it." Let their silence be buried under the truth. External speakers blasted the recordings into open space. Neutral observers listening on the fringes could not miss it. The stories the Vire tried to erase now echoed louder than any command transmission. Marines bleeding in corridors heard it too. Voices of the dead urging them on, memories cutting sharper than any order. Rander's voice crackled in, hoarse but steady. "We heard them, Captain. Every man down here heard them. We're not backing another step." His words carried the ragged pride of a soldier who had seen too many fall, but still refused to yield. Bray's voice followed, softer, trembling. "The civilians? They're hearing it too. Some are crying, some are shouting. They know now why they fight to live." The laser plasma display showed the choir ship listing, smoke and flame bleeding from ruptured veins. Holt stared at it without triumph, only grim resolve. "Finish it," he said. "Make certain it never sings again." The rails fired once more, each strike tearing through weakened armor until the choir's hull split open. Fire bloomed outward, consuming its structure in a rolling burst that painted the stars with burning fragments. The deck shook with the echo of its destruction. Men clutched railings, eyes wide, ears ringing from the shock. Then silence fell, not the crushing silence the choir brought, but a different one, the kind born after a storm when men realize they are still standing. Holt's chest rose and fell heavily, his hand loosening on the railing at last. He let the silence linger, then spoke quietly, the words carrying across the deck. "They believed stories could be erased. Instead, they carried the battle for us. Every man listening felt the truth of it, down to his marrow. They had not just broken a ship. They had broken the idea that silence could bury memory, and as long as that truth survived, so would they." "Shift the guns off the frigates," Holt ordered, his tone cutting through the ragged aftermath of the choir ship's destruction. "We're not trading shots for hours. We strike where it hurts." His command drew startled looks. Men expected him to consolidate, to breathe after the miracle they had just witnessed. Instead, he stood rigid at the railing, eyes fixed on the laser plasma display, where enemy cruisers regrouped in disciplined arcs. Their silhouettes glowed faint red as their coil lances charged, ready to burn the station apart with sheer volume of fire. Olin glanced up from his console, jaw tight. His pupils flickered against the scrolling data, already calculating. "They're moving to distance. Standard siege pattern. If they keep range, we can't answer fast enough. Our rails will shear their outer armor, but won't bite deep." His voice wavered under exhaustion, yet he forced clarity into every word. Holt didn't blink. "Then we shorten the range without moving an inch." "Bray, how many cargo rocks are in the yard?" The quartermaster blinked as though he'd misheard. He wiped sweat from his brow, the sleeve leaving a dark smear. "Dozens. Some filled with regolith, others packed with frozen water." "Captain, those are raw lifelines. We can't risk them." "We risk everything," Holt cut him off. His tone wasn't raised, but it carried a steel edge that silenced the deck. "Every crate in this yard is already a target. Better to spend them now than watch them vaporize when those lances cycle." He turned, eyes burning. "Olin, plot vectors. We turn rocks into corridors they can't shoot through." For a moment, the crew only heard the dull reverberation of distant battle, the muffled concussions of boarding fights still raging, the hiss of fire suppression jets spitting chemical foam. Then Olin nodded sharply, his voice rising with reluctant excitement. "If we align the rocks across intersecting arcs and shatter them at staggered intervals, we can flood the field with debris." A sleek corridor, Rander's voice bled through the comms, hoarse but steady. Captain, we're still locked down with boarding squads. If you've got a plan that keeps them from grinding us into dust, spit it out fast. Holt leaned toward the receiver, his voice cutting like a blade. Sergeant, you'll have your chance to hit them where they bleed. I'm carving that chance right now. Within minutes, massive cargo rocks groaned as tugs strained against their anchors. Through the viewport, crews in battered suits tethered themselves to jagged surfaces, planting guidance plates while sparks and smoke drifted around them. The air on the deck thickened with the scent of burnt insulation carried in through vents. Holt watched them work with the tightness in his chest of a man gambling men's lives like dice. Olin called out updates, his voice harsh over the din. Vectors aligned. On your mark, Captain. Fire the slugs, Holt commanded. Rails thundered. Slugs streaked into the rocks, splitting them into showers of fragments. Shards glittered like a storm of broken glass drifting across the darkness, forming shifting corridors of debris. The cruisers adjusted formation, wary of entering. Coil lances glowed brighter, their heat radiating so strongly that even from the station, thermal readouts spiked. They'll turn inside the corridor to keep their cooling stable, Olin warned. His throat bobbed as he swallowed. That compresses their formation. Exactly, Holt murmured. On the comms, Rander let out a harsh laugh, despite the smoke behind his words. You're hurting them, like beasts in a pen. Give me the opening and we'll stick the knife in. Prepare your assault boats, Holt said. The moment they close ranks, you strike. The next minutes stretched like wire. The cruisers shifted, arcs tightening, heat shimmering off their frames. Then the inevitable happened. They turned inward, away from the sleek corridors. Their screens compressed, frigates pulling tight, their once spread power now crowded. Now, Holt snapped. Rander's Marines launched in assault boats, small crafts darting through the shadow of the drifting sleet. From the viewport, they looked like sparks leaping from dying embers, diving headlong toward the enemy. Holt gripped the railing harder, his nails biting into flesh as he whispered under his breath. Hold, damn you! Hold! The assault boats latched onto the dorsal spine of a cruiser. Explosions rattled along its surface as Marines cut through armor with thermal charges. Holt could almost feel the tremor under his boots, as though their fire burned through his own nerves. His throat constricted when Rander's voice growled through the channel. We're in! Dropping the payload now. Inside the cruiser, Rander's men fought through narrow maintenance shafts, the clang of boots on steel mixing with the gunfire echoing in confined spaces. They reached the coolant loop, sealed canisters of expanding compound strapped to their backs. With gritted teeth, they tore open access hatches and shoved the canisters inside. Foam deployed, Rander shouted, his breath ragged. Pulling out now! On Holt's display, the cruiser's readings spiked violently. The compound inside swelled with the waste heat, choking the coolant lines. Coil lances flared dangerously, their housings groaning before rupturing in violent bursts. Fire rolled across the cruiser's length, panels buckling outward as systems failed catastrophically. The enemy's formation fractured. Frigates scrambled to shield the wounded giant, drawing tighter into the compressed knot. Holt's hand rose sharply. Gunnery, skip shot sequence. Use Olin's ricochet patterns, Rails screamed. Rounds slammed into debris, glancing off at brutal angles. Shards of tungsten tore across the enemy's compressed screen. One frigate split open, fire spilling from its midsection. Another reeled, its flank shredded, smoke trailing in spirals. On the deck, men cheered, fists slamming against consoles. Holt silenced them with a raised hand. They're not beaten yet. Focus. They'll lash out harder now. As if answering, one remaining cruiser surged forward, breaking ranks. Its intent was unmistakable. The Icon barreled straight toward Fort Arcturus, ramming course locked. Holt's stomach clenched, his skin chilled. He met Olin's wide eyes, then looked back to the display. They mean to bury us under their corpse, Bray muttered, voice trembling. Holt spoke evenly, though his pulse hammered. Then we make sure they choke before they reach us. The crew braced instinctively as the enemy closed, but Holt didn't flinch. His gaze held steady, his voice carrying the weight of command that refused surrender. Prepare counterstrike. We end this on our terms. The cruiser grew larger on the viewport, its surface burning with heat, lances ruined, but engines flaring. Holt's chest tightened, but he didn't let fear show. Around him, every man watched, sweat streaking their dirt-marked faces, breaths held as the storm approached. "Open the hangar. I'm taking the Darrow," Holt declared, his voice hard as a steel striking stone. The command deck froze. Men looked up from shattered consoles and flickering displays, their faces pale with exhaustion and smeared with soot. For a moment, the only sound was the steady alarm tone that had refused to die since the siege began. Olin turned in his chair, disbelief carved into every line of his face. "You can't," the intelligence chief said, his voice cracking. "That Corvette's half crippled. Hull breaches sealed with patches, guidance half blind, thrusters coughing black smoke. You send a skeleton crew, maybe they buy us minutes. But you're the only commander left holding this station together." Holt's hand tightened on the railing until the chill bit through his palm. His eyes, reddened from smoke and sleepless hours, burned with a fire that silenced dissent. "That cruiser won't slow. Its engines are screaming like wounded animals, and its commander means to ram us clean through. We don't survive unless someone meets it head on. I know the Darrow's bones. I flew her before any of you trusted her frame. She'll answer to me." Bray's voice broke in from the logistics table, his tone desperate. "Captain, we'll lose you. The station can't run leaderless. The men, the civilians, they look to you." His hands shook against him. The table, the dirt under his nails stark under the harsh light. "Send anyone else. Don't throw yourself into that fire." Holt's reply was sharp, but not cruel. "Every man here has already given more than he had to give. I won't ask another to ride into death when I know the Darrow's quirks, when I know how she drifts under pressure. Command isn't about hiding behind the last wall. It's about stepping through it when no one else can." Olin swallowed, his Adam's apple jerking in his throat. His whisper came strained. "Then at least let me chart your intercept. Don't go blind." Holt gave him a single nod. "Do it. Fast." He left the deck without another word, boots striking against the floor with the rhythm of finality. The lift carried him down, air heavy with smoke and oil, the scent biting at his sinuses. His chest tightened, not from fear, though it lived in him, but from the certainty of choice. In the hangar, the Darrow loomed battered, scars across her hull sealed with hasty welds, her paint blackened from fire. Men worked furiously around her, faces lit by sparks from last-second repairs. Navigator Evo Cade emerged from the shadows, wiping grease from his hands onto a rag, his eyes sharp despite the grime streaking his cheek. "You'll need me," Cade said flatly, before Holt could speak. "She won't answer clean, not after the punishment she's taken. You need hands who know her guts as well as her helm." His jaw was set, his refusal to back down clear. Holt met his gaze. "If you come knowing it may be your last flight." Cade's lips curved into a dry smile. "We've all been flying on borrowed time since the first choir pulse. Better to spend it where it matters." The two boarded together. Inside, the Darrow smelled of scorched insulation and burned wiring, the air sharp and dry. Lights flickered across bulkheads, some dead, others glowing faintly as if reluctant to shine. Holt slid into the command chair, the cracked leather familiar under him. Cade strapped in at navigation, hands moving over controls worn smooth from years of use. The hangar doors yawned wide and the Corvette slid forward, thrusters shuddering, the vibrations rattling their bones. Through the cracked viewport, the enemy cruiser filled the starscape, its engines blazing white as it drove on an unyielding course toward Fort Arcturus. Holt's pulse hammered in his ears, but his grip was steady on the helm. "Bring us under her keel," Holt ordered, his voice low, focused. Cade adjusted thrusters, his fingers quick despite the sweat dripping down his temple. "She's fighting me." "Guidance is stuttering, but she'll answer if I coax her." The Darrow lurched, the deck tilting beneath them, sparks showering from overhead panels. The comm crackled. Olin's voice reached them, sharp with urgency. "You've got one chance. Plant charges under her intakes. Vent anything you've got left into those engines, and they'll choke on their own fire." Copy, Holt replied. His jaw clenched as he steered the Darrow downward, the enemy cruiser's massive shadow blotting out the starlight. Its underside stretched above them, like a black mountain sliding forward, every plate scarred, every seam glowing with heat. Cade's hands flew. Ballast charges armed. Say the word, the cruiser's engines thundered ahead, their light flooding the cockpit with blinding glare. Holt narrowed his eyes, sweat trickling down his back as the heat washed over them, even through shielding. His ribs ached from the strain of holding steady, his heart pounding like a war drum. Now, Holt commanded. The Darrow's belly erupted, charges spewing torrents of superheated brine into the cruiser's intake systems. The effect was immediate. The great vessel shuddered, its thrust lines faltering, engines coughing as steam exploded outward. Warning lights cascaded across Holt's console, the Darrow screaming from the strain. The enemy cruiser lurched, its course skewing, its nose twisting away from Fort Arcturus. But the Darrow was finished. Alarms shrieked, flames licked through cracked panels, the stench of burning insulation thick enough to sting eyes and throat. Cade fought to keep her level, his teeth bared, but the Corvette rattled apart beneath them. "Eject!" Holt roared. He tore the harness free, the straps biting into his shoulders as they snapped back. He slammed the eject control, the canopy blasting away with a deafening crack. Air whipped past, freezing against his skin as he was hurled into the black. The Darrow vanished behind him in a blossom of fire, the explosion tearing through her fractured frame. Heat scorched Holt's faceplate, his breath catching in his throat as the shockwave hurled him spinning. Stars wheeled violently until his stabilizers kicked, slowing the tumble. Through the haze of his visor, Holt saw the enemy cruiser drifting sideways, its engines crippled, its attempt at ramming thwarted. Fort Arcturus still stood behind it, battered but intact. His chest tightened with fierce relief even as the emptiness closed around him. His body trembled from the sudden chill, his ears still ringing from the detonation. The comm crackled, broken and distant. Rander's voice, strained but alive, broke through. "Captain, Holt, we saw it. The cruiser's dead in the water. You saved us." Holt floated, his lungs burning, sweat freezing against his brow inside the helmet. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, letting the sound of Rander's voice carry him. His sacrifice was written now, not in archives that could be erased, but in the marrow of every man who witnessed it. "Find him before the cold does," Rander growled, his throat raw from smoke and blood, as search teams spread across the fractured field. His voice crackled through every comm still alive, cutting across exhaustion. The men around him were battered, some limping, others half blind from burns. Yet no one faltered. The sacrifice of the Darrow had pulled them back from the edge. They would not let their captain vanish into silence. Fragments of the Corvette still glowed faintly in the distance, jagged shards tumbling slowly, some burning, some lifeless. Holt drifted somewhere beyond them, body twisting inside the cracked flight chair of his eject pod. The suit's systems hissed as frost began to creep across his visor, tiny veins of ice racing outward. His lungs ached with every shallow draw of filtered air, his heartbeat sluggish but defiant. He blinked hard, forcing his mind to stay awake, even as the black closed in around the edges of his vision. Static scratched in his ear, then Rander's voice, fierce and unyielding. "Captain, hold. You hear me? You're still in this fight." Holt's lips cracked as he tried to form words. The sound that escaped was little more than a rasp, but his will poured through it. "Report. Station status." The answer came ragged but steady. "Borders broken. The cruiser you crippled is tumbling dead. Fort Arcturus still stands." There was a pause, then Rander's tone softened. "You bought us time with your blood." A tug's searchlight flared against Holt's visor, searing his eyes. Figures in suits reached for him, gloved hands gripping his harness, pulling him from the pod. The sudden shift sent pain stabbing down his ribs, yet he clenched his teeth against it. The hiss of sealing locks followed, warm air flooding into the chamber as they dragged him aboard. The taste of oxygen flooded his mouth, sharp and metallic, almost sweet in contrast to the freezing void. When he woke on the med deck, every breath burned as if knives scraped along his chest. Olin leaned over him, dark rings beneath his eyes, the smell of sweat and antiseptic clinging to his uniform. "You're alive," he muttered, voice breaking in relief. "Half the station thought we'd lost you with the Darrow." Holt coughed, pain shaking his frame, yet his eyes sharpened. "What's left of the Vire fleet?" Olin straightened, fatigue giving way to grim satisfaction. "Retreating. Without their choir ship, without their ram, they're fractured. Our broadcasts are spreading faster than their commanders can silence them. Stations along the border are already relaying the record. They're watching what happened here, learning how to fight back." Bray arrived then, his uniform streaked with grime, his hands trembling as he carried a case of recovered echo cylinders. He set it beside Holt's bed with reverence. Civilians carried them through every tunnel. Even when they panicked, they clutched them like lifelines. "Everyone we planted is intact." His voice cracked, but he pressed on. "You said continuity was the weapon. You were right." Holt shifted against the bed's restraints, the weight of pain anchoring him. His voice came rough, but strong enough. "Then the story isn't mine. It belongs to them. All of them. Every soldier who held a corridor, every worker who strapped down cargo by hand, every family who carried cylinders through fire." Rander stepped inside, his uniform burned and bloodied, a bandage wrapping his shoulder. He saluted with grim formality, then dropped it quickly, his expression raw. "Captain, men keep asking me what to tell the wounded. What to tell the ones who watch friends die in those halls." His eyes locked with Holt's, searching for an answer heavy enough to hold them together. Holt studied him in silence, then spoke with a weight that filled the room. "Tell them we fought so memory outlives silence. Tell them their names will be carried farther than any pulse can wipe. The Veer tried to make us empty. Instead, we filled the black with stories they can't erase. That is what they bled for. That is what every death means." Rander's jaw tightened, his eyes bright with unshed tears. He gave a single nod. "Then they'll know it wasn't wasted." Days passed in grinding recovery. Fires burned out, bulkheads were patched, corpses collected with quiet reverence. Yet beyond the station, signals spread like wildfire. Echo cylinders were copied and dispatched aboard every surviving vessel, coded into transmissions carried by traders, scattered into asteroid caches. Border polities intercepted them, then passed them onward, unwilling to be caught unprepared. The record of silenced worlds became more than evidence. It became a manual, a litany of survival. Reports trickled in of Veer ships refused at ports, their priests challenged by their own crews, doctrines questioned aloud. Where fear once kept allies silent, now suspicion drove them apart. The silence the choir had imposed for generations cracked, replaced by noise, angry, defiant, human noise. On Fort Arcturus, Holt walked the ruined corridors at last, his steps slow but determined. Men stopped as he passed, some saluting, others simply watching with quiet respect. The scars of the boarding battles remained, walls blackened, the stench of burned insulation clinging stubbornly, floors etched with gouges from gunfire. Yet in every corner, survivors worked, patching holes, cleaning blood, carrying crates of new echo cylinders to their hiding places. The fortress was scarred, but it lived. He reached the command deck. The displays flickered faintly, patched but functional. He turned to his officers, Olin, Bray, Rander, and the others who had endured, and spoke not as a commander, but as a man among equals. The Veer believed they could kill us by erasing memory. They thought stories were weakness. Today they learned stories are stronger than doctrine, stronger than ships, stronger than silence. They will come again, but they'll never face the same enemy. We are no longer what we were before this siege. We are something they cannot comprehend. A hush settled, every man holding the weight of his words. Holt drew, breath chest aching, then finished. They tried to silence our stories. Instead, those stories outlived them. That truth will carry farther than any fleet. It will burn longer than any fire, and it will never die. The deck erupted, not in cheers, but in steady, thunderous strikes of fists against railings, boots hammering against steel, a rhythm that echoed down the halls and into the bones of the station. It was not celebration. It was affirmation. The noise of survival, the declaration that silence had been broken forever. Far beyond Arcturus, signals carried the sound outward, reaching stations and colonies that had never heard of the fortress before this battle. They would remember the name. They would remember the fight. And in that memory, humanity had written itself into the record of the galaxy, not as prey, not as victims, but as the people whose echoes outlasted the silence. If this battle sent chills down your spine, smash that subscribe button for more gripping HFY tales where humanity rewrites the rules of war. Now we want to hear from you. If you had the power to plant an echo net, stories hidden in every corner of the galaxy, what memory of humanity would you preserve so no enemy could ever erase it? Drop your answer in the comments. We read every single one. Thanks for watching Stellar HFY, where human strategy turns silence into victory. See you in the next story.